My guest tonight is Dr. E. Michael Jones. He returns tonight to discuss an article he wrote for the December issue of Culture Wars magazine. Um, Dr. Jones is an historian and prolific writer. He is the author of many books, the most recent being Barren Metal, A History of Capitalism as a Conflict Between Labor and Usury. Dr. Jones, how are you doing tonight?
Good, good.
Thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
And you wrote this piece in the latest issue, December issue of Culture Wars magazine, which you are the editor of.
Yes.
Soros or Cyrus, the violent legacy of the Black Jewish Alliance. And there you kind of tear off the progressive veneer, or at least the official narrative of the civil rights movement, and also this alliance that many have written about between the civil rights movement, blacks and Jews, and many have attributed this to the sort of the progressive nature of the Jews. And you take a different interpretation of this relationship. How do you want to get into this? Tell us about this.
Well, I mean, first of all, the civil rights movement is not the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about an alliance that began with the founding of the NAACP in, I believe it was 1913. We're talking about right around that time, the Jewish reaction to the Leo Frank lynching in the South, and basically the beginning of the Jewish attempt to use black people as their proxy warriors in a revolutionary struggle in the United States. So it began with the founding of the NAACP. It began with it talked about lynching. Ostensibly, the NAACP was there to fight lynching, but the first real battle was their attack on Marcus Garvey, another black. It was a competing black leader, competing to W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the man working for the NAACP. Marcus Garvey went to NAACP headquarters and walked in, and he realized there were no black people there. This was in the 1920s. It was all Jewish lawyers. So it was basically a Jewish operation funded by the Spingarn brothers. Amy Spingarn, the wife of one of the Spingarns, was a big promoter of Langston Hughes and black poetry, black literature, and the Harlem Renaissance. So this is how it got started. And the culmination of it, I guess their biggest achievement would have been the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So I try and situate the civil rights movement in that context. But the bigger context that I wanted to talk about when I went to Iran for a conference on the racial situation in America was the idea of the proxy warrior, because we're seeing all kinds of examples of that right now, all the way up to the present. For example, the homosexual is obviously a proxy warrior. And what we saw recently was the Obergefell decision, was the use of the homosexual as the revolutionary, the alliance between the CEOs and the revolutionaries that basically overturned the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana in March of this year. But we're also talking about the use of proxy warriors in the Middle East. Syria, ISIS, those people, they're proxy warriors who have gotten out of control, which is oftentimes what happens to proxy warriors. We're talking about irregular warfare. Liddell Hart referred to it as that. He said that the guerrillas that the English funded and supported during the Peninsula Wars against Napoleon were the first example of England getting involved in paying proxy warriors. He says it's always a bad idea. You always attract criminals to your cause, and they always get out of control, and then you got problems, because when you can't turn these people on and off like a light switch. It just doesn't work that way. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And then in Iran, I also wanted to talk about Ferguson, because that was the big topic. And it turns out that the Black Jewish Alliance has come back again. Here we thought it was dead. 1967, Harold Cruse wrote the obituary. Harold Cruse, being the head of the Black Studies program at the University of Michigan, wrote the book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, in which he said that he talked about his experience as a communist, a black communist from Harlem, who thought he was signing up for something and ended up being a proxy warrior for the Jews who ran the Communist Party in this country. And once that word came out, the whole atmosphere, the temperature dropped. We're talking about 1 year before Martin Luther King is murdered. The whole black movement starts to get increasingly violent. You're talking about the rise of the Black Panthers at this point as the replacement for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as the kind of paradigmatic black organization. But you're also talking about one more instance of proxy warriors. The Black Panthers were a Jewish fantasy created by David Horowitz, who's now a neoconservative Zionist, and Bert Schneider, who made a lot of money off of Easy Rider and other Hollywood ventures. That went bad in '69 when the cops in Chicago came in, busted up the operation. The COINTELPRO, the FBI, had put an agent provocateur in there who bought a lot of guns. He informed the police. The police came in. He put Kool-Aid in their, he put barbiturates in their Kool-Aid. They all fell asleep. The police came in and killed them all. And so terror spread throughout the black population. I mean, that's what I wanted to talk about. But also I wanted to talk about the most recent example, which is basically Ferguson and Black Lives Matter. It turns out that George Soros, the big Jewish magnate from Hungary, through his Open Society Foundation, has put $33 million into the groups demonstrating in Ferguson and Black Lives Matter. So what we saw over the summer here is, once again, the resurrection of the Black Jewish Alliance, the resurrection of the Jew money man behind the scenes funding black revolutionaries. After the Jonathan Butler was one of the big revolutionaries in Ferguson, he went to University of Missouri in September, and they staged a successful revolution at the University of Missouri. He went on a hunger strike, got the football team to boycott the game, and drove the president and chairman of the board out of the university. The University of Missouri now has a black president. So there you have it, the resurrection of the Black Jewish Alliance and the continuation of this tradition of proxy warfare.
And the situation in Missouri is now a confirmed hoax, from what I understand.
You mean the poop swastika?
That and the Klan, and it's the I remember the young man who went on strike, said that he'd been on the university for 7 years and he never felt safe, which I thought was rather strange.
This is preposterous. If there's one place that goes out of its way to remove the least aspect, a scintilla of racist thought, it's the universities.
Academia, and it tells you the priorities there, because the president was unmoved until the football team went on strike.
That's right. So there's the real power.
There's your priorities.
And so I was there at Mizzou a week or so ago, and the guy, my contact there, told me they had a losing season anyway, so it didn't really matter. No team that's in the running for the national championship is going to boycott.
Well,
that's not going to happen.
Yeah, too much money involved in that. Yeah, and that's a good example of that. Is that the Missouri situation, which was ludicrous on its face. But you get in. It's basically what you're saying is a lot of these movements, what are these development of these groups like the Black Panthers, Civil Rights Movement. These aren't entirely organic, or they're co-opted immediately and used for some. Social engineering scheme or political objective by an outside group, a more powerful group. In this case, the Jews, or maybe even the Central Intelligence Agency in some cases.
Well, I mean, the FBI got involved in turning the spigot off on the Black Panthers, but that's just part of the game here.
Yeah.
When they get out of control, then you kill them. Don't we have movies about this? Isn't this what the Bourne Identity movies are all about?
Mm-hmm.
The agent, you create this guy, and then he turns out that you don't like what he's doing, and then you kill him. Well, that's what supposedly is going on in Syria right now. We're going to turn on them. We're turning on ISIS, although that is so complicated and it's such a sham. Yeah. I hesitate to use that as an example.
Well, yeah, that warrants a whole series of shows to explain what's going on over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this notion of destabilization, this is a kind of a. Well, you mentioned George Soros, and of course he's involved in destabilization at home and also overseas. With the Ukraine and.
Absolutely, he was heavily involved in the in post-communist Eastern Europe, funding all sorts of groups with the Open Society, all sorts of revolutionary operations. We had all of these CIA color operations, color revolutions, all the way up to the 2009 attempt in Iran to overthrow the election. The Russian government has finally wised up, and they banned Soros's one of his foundations in Russia because they realize it's a fifth column. He's trying to overthrow the government. This is the way we overthrow governments now. You know, it happened. This is sort of what I was trying to tell the Iranians, that the situation in Indiana is really no different than the situation in Iran. Basically, Iran was the beginning of this whole project with the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953. This is when the CIA entered the White House. C.D. Jackson, the CIA operative, was Dwight Eisenhower's campaign manager, and then he became his chief of staff. And then he got into the White House, and they started coordinating all of these operations, including bringing Time Life into as the propaganda ministry. C.D. Jackson was on the CIA payroll. He was a chief of staff at the Eisenhower White House, and he was also involved with the Luce Empire as Harry Luce's chief factotum.
And it was David Wemhoff who has the book about that operation against the Catholic Church.
Right. We just got back from a press conference of the National Press Club trying to promote Dave's book, John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition, How the CIA Changed the Catholic Church. So we're talking about a tradition that started in 1953, and they've never changed the playbook. It's like Princeton and the SATs test. You know, they never changed the questions. So after a while, it was easy to get a perfect score because you knew all the questions and all the answers. So this scheme has gone on. It happened in Iran in 2009. Again, all those people with their green bandanas, you know, all these NGOs funneling money to demonstrators and so on and so forth to overthrow the election. It didn't work in 2009. If you want to see the story, their version of the story, there's a film out called Rosewater, directed by Jon Stewart, that tells the story from their point of view. But from the Iranians' point of view, it was a coup d'etat, an attempted coup d'etat, and finally the supreme leader stepped in and certified the election, said the election was valid, and they circumvented a revolution. In Indiana, on the other hand, the governor allied himself with the CEO and allowed the CEO to come in and overthrow the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. But it's the same modus operandi. You've got this some type of guy complaining, some type of group complaining about human rights violations, which then allows the United States to come in and covertly overthrow your government and put in their goons who will then give you real human rights violations, which is what we're seeing now in the Ukraine. Another example of exactly the same thing.
And same thing in Syria too, apparently, yeah.
But the difference in Syria is that it's not working.
Yeah, they underestimate the popularity, or at least the support of the Assad regime.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they also underestimated Russia's tenacity in resisting this. So the Ukraine led to the Crimea going back to Russia, and then Russia, with its back to the wall, said, "We're not giving another inch."
Yeah,
and then they.
That was also similar back in 2008 with Georgia too, right?
Was it color? Yeah, it was a color revolution. Well, I mean, Russia. You mean Russia's retaliation against that? Yeah, we're not going to give up another inch of territory. We understand the way this thing works now, and you abused our trust. I think this is the way the Russians feel about the United States. It brutally abused the trust of the Russians, who could have, launched World War III if they wanted to over the Berlin Wall, but they didn't. They trusted the Americans, and the Americans abused their trust.
That was the supposed the promise that James Baker transmitted to Gorbachev, Bush's promise not to
move NATO eastward.
And didn't get it in writing, but that probably would have made a difference anyway.
That was an abuse of the trust of the Russians, and also the Soros inspired looting operation of Russia, where Soros's friend Jeffrey Sachs and the Harvard boys engaged in a ruthless looting of the Russian economy.
Yeah, the neoliberals, and they didn't also they weren't they instrumental in empowering the oligarchs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how
yeah,
they did the looting,
yeah.
and then the oligarchs funneled the money to Wall Street, and so it was like a big financial merry-go-round.
Get,
But I mean, I have to say that the State Department did hold the Harvard to its promises, the contracts that it signed, and Harvard had to pay $23 million in fines for violating their own contracts. They filed with the State Department
mm-hmm.
during the so-called privatization, which was in fact just a looting of the Russian economy. Larry Summers was then president of Harvard, and he had to resign. So they cooked up this ridiculous story about
The math.
yeah, girls aren't good at math. Larry said something really bad, like really naughty about girls and math, which is the cover story they cooked up to get him out because Harvard just had to pay $23 million in fines for looting the Russian economy.
Yeah, Larry Summers is the one that wrote that memo when he was at the World Bank, but it was okay to dump pollutants on Africa because their life expectancy was short anyway. So this is the caliber of people we have running the Treasury Department at Harvard.
These are the guys that fail upward. These people are condemned to fail upward.
But again, what happened here with the Black Jewish Alliance was that the Jewish elite raised a lot of money for the civil rights movement, and when these uppity revolutionaries didn't got resentful about being told what to do. I think this occurred during the teacher strike, 1967.
That was the final nail in the coffin. I think the real change took place when the leadership, the behind the scenes leadership, told Martin Luther King he had to go to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Now the story I've heard, this was the research I did in The Slaughter of Cities. I tell this story in The Slaughter of Cities. I heard that it was Nelson Rockefeller that paid the SCLC $25,000. Peanuts now, but back then a significant sum. The Quakers were also involved. They wanted Martin Luther King to come to Chicago since the early 50s.
This was to bust up the ethnic neighborhoods, right?
Yes. Well, what else could you do in Chicago? That was the big thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Jews were. Stanley Levison never stopped being Martin Luther King's main fundraiser. So the Jews were also involved, but the Jews were involved locally in Chicago. Mm-hmm. I mean, Louis Wirth, who is the father of social engineering in the United States of America, was a Jew, and he was working at the University of Chicago.
And he is the true author of An American Dilemma, you think?
I think. I mean, it was a joint venture, but I mean, the one guy we know who didn't write it was Gunnar Myrdal. I mean, we can be sure of that. You know, he could not have written that book. I mean, I can write 1,400-page books, but I can't do it the way Gunnar Myrdal did, by coming over here, doing the grand tour, and then leaving when Hitler involves Norway. It's just not going to work. And he admits it in the preface to The American Dilemma as well. He said he put it into the competent hands of Samuel Stouffer and Frank Notestein. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the military intelligence. That's OSS. That's OWI, and they're the ones who wrote the book.
And that story again. We did a show on that. A couple shows on that actually, and I highly recommend that book to get into the details of that story. But that again, what we're dealing with here is social engineering, and certain groups are exploiting, I guess, real fissures, real problems in the country, but their goal isn't to resolve these problems or to bring about some sort of progressive nirvana. It's to actually exacerbate these differences, divide and conquer. Has nothing to do with bringing out a better, more just society. You're just exploiting these differences, and that's the key point people have to remember when we're talking about this. Despite all the progressive veneer and propaganda we hear through through official history of these events, there's groups working behind the scenes, always in these scenes, that have ulterior motives that aren't exactly
right.
That our best interest, or humanity's best interest, isn't that hard to hear. So that's what we're talking about.
No,
yeah,
and I think the racial whatever you want to call it, racial conflict in America is subsiding. I'm basing my experience on South Bend and Cincinnati, especially Cincinnati, since one of my sons lives in Cincinnati. He was living closer to Over the Rhine. The church he goes to is in Over the Rhine, it's Old St. Mary's. This was one of the neighborhoods that had been targeted for racial transfer. You know, the Germans, the white ethnics, the Germans were driven out, and the blacks were brought in. That's where they built the projects. Was the new plan. All the white folk were supposed to head out to places like Mason or something like that, and leave the city to the black people. And I'm sure these were the moments of real racial tension. It's undeniable that, for example, where I lived in Philadelphia in the 50s, there was racial warfare going on. There's absolutely no question.
But that was because people were being forcibly removed, more or less, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're in a sense, this is the neighborhood. This was my ethnic neighborhood where I grew up. We've lived here. This is what we call home. And now suddenly we're supposed to leave. Well, we're going to put up a fight. And of course, you can't do that because you're a white racist if you do that. This was precisely what Martin Luther King did in Chicago. He showed up and he said, well, what did he say? What exactly is your purpose here? This is black ministers asking him this. Mayor Daley is asking him, what exactly is your point? There are no segregated water fountains in Chicago. We're not like down south. Even Dorothy Tillman, his lieutenant, said, you know, down south you was black or white. You wasn't none of this Irish or Polish or none of that stuff. It was a different situation. It was the ethnic neighborhood. What's wrong with ethnic neighborhoods? That's the way the world. That was the world of the big cities of the North and the West in the United States for the first half of the 20th century. And then suddenly the social engineers, the masters of the universe behind the curtain, declare this is wrong. This is illegal.
Yeah, the war planners, the centralizers, the people who had some sort of idea to somehow collectivize, collectivize the nation, thought these ethnic neighborhoods weren't trustworthy enough or just too divided, and so they resorted to all these tactics, you know, to purge.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right. So what you're seeing here is basically preparation for the warfare state. Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about here, because we're going to have to now. Your first war is the war with fascism. You know the stuff that I said about Louis Wirth, you know, saying that some people are untrustworthy because of their origins. And it turns out that they all happen to be Catholic. Well, I wonder why. But we're mobilizing the population for war. And then after we defeat fascism, well, we're not going to stop this mobilization. This is the way we control everybody. And this is the crude form of social engineering. And it's morphed over time into more and more sophisticated forms of social engineering. But nothing has changed. We need to mobilize a docile population to project power outward so that we can have our empire. That's the bottom line.
It's the only way that Henry Lucius can get his American century.
That was the way. That was his plan. Yes.
So he looked at, and David Wemhoff does a good thing in detailing his background or his experience in World War I about educating the doughboys and
that's right,
make him think a certain way to get them to go off and get killed in the trenches. You know.
That's right. He felt he had a gift of doing that, and then he made contact with Walter Lippmann, the great the Jewish propagandist for controlling the masses through controlling ideas, and the result was Time magazine, which after World War II became the propaganda ministry of the United States. And also, let's be honest, it was engaged in black ops as well. The black op against the Vatican Council. They were trying to change the outcome of the Vatican Council. So much for your separation of church and state, fellas.
That's another topic. The Vatican. Some people believe that this getting the Pope to declare the Second Vatican Council was a black op, tricking him. No,
that's not true. You know. I know that story is not true. The church was in a state of crisis because of the long dying of Pius XII. Mm-hmm. He had centralized. I mean, this is just an era. The 20th century was the era. The beginning of it was the era of centralization of power.
Yeah, yeah.
So Pius XII was like, I mean, I don't want to make you know what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah.
It's like Mussolini, in a sense, like Hitler, like Stalin, like Theodore Roosevelt. He was of that era where you could get on the radio and mobilize large masses of people. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, the power centralized in the Vatican in a way that it hadn't before that time. But what happens when you got a guy who's dying in office for years? Well, you've got a paralysis. And of course, this was a crisis for someone like Cardinal Ottaviani, who went then to John the 23rd and said, you got to call a council. We got to straighten things out. And he was the author of the preliminary documents. And these are documents that are trying to deal with the crisis. And the two sides of the coin. There's the Soviet threat and there's the American threat from an Italian perspective to Catholic cultures throughout the world, throughout Europe especially. And that was the basis for the council. But of course, the CIA had been involved in Italy ever since the end of World War II, trying to manipulate outcomes there. They didn't want Italy to fall into the hands of the communists. Luce had his wife appointed ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Italy, because he knew this was a crucial battle and he wanted to be involved in it.
And Claire Booth Luce, right?
Right.
Yeah, and she was actually, if I understand it, she also had multiple affairs, including British intelligence agents during World War II, and of course, maybe that's just rumors. But and that's what
I think you got that backwards. I think it was Harry that was having the affairs. I think, as far as I know, she was faithful to her to Harry once she got married. She took LSD with John Courtney Murray. I think John Courtney Murray was in love with her because he'd write these passionate letters to her.
Do you think
there's no evidence that they consummated it that I know of.
Do you think there was an MK Ultra angle there with LSD? I know
exactly. Well, Gerald Hurd was the guy who got them involved, and Gerald Hurd was connected to Aldous Huxley, and Aldous Huxley was the guy who brought LSD over here.
Yep. Now we're getting back to the Black Jewish Alliance and the Civil Rights Movement. So basically, in the article, what I gathered from your article was what happened was Stokely Carmichael purged him from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, correct?
Yeah.
Then they were in retribution, and also in conjunction with the CIA, they got this guy named Gordon Parks to produce a few movies, please, so-called blaxploitation movies.
Yeah, I think that. See, at this point, the establishment had enough with black revolutionaries.
Uh-huh.
The iconic figure, I have that picture in the article, is of Huey Newton sitting on that rattan chair.
Yeah.
He's got the black beret, he's got the afro, the black jacket. He's holding a rifle in one hand and a spear in the other. That image led to that was the image of the black revolutionary. And at this point, the government decided they had enough of this. The FBI had come in with their COINTEL program and murdered all the Black Panthers in Chicago. What we now know is that Time Life and the CIA were involved in creating a new image. And this was the job of Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks was a black man who was also a photographer for Time Life. His job at Time Life was to infiltrate black organizations. And sad to say, these black organizations pretty much judged people by the color of their skin. And he was real black. I mean, you look at him and you think, well, he's real black. He's one of us. So let him in and we'll talk to him. So he would go and infiltrate the Nation of Islam, for example. And he would, I mean, they would tell him, everything he wanted to know. And then he'd go back to headquarters. And then it said, this is in his memoir. Whoever his handler was at this point said, no, we need a picture of the entire leadership. So he goes back and they all assemble there and let him take their picture. Did the same thing with the Black Panthers. He paid Eldridge Cleaver $10,000 for an interview in Algiers. And so he goes in and goes back, gives the CIA. He's always debriefed by the CIA when he comes back. And he gives them the layout of the apartment that they're living in case you want to have people come in and do what they did in Chicago, bust in and murder everybody. So he was a traitor. He was a traitor to the black people. He was working for the CIA. He was working for Time Life, a double agent. And so what is his next job? His next job is he quits Time And they drag him out to Hollywood, and Jim Aubrey tells him he wants him to do a black detective thing called Shaft movie. And then Gordon Parks in his memoir goes into great detail about how the black people needed a new role model, and he was the guy who was going to do it. Well, Shaft is a big success, and then the next one is the real image changer, and that is Superfly. And Superfly was pretty. They wanted Gordon Parks to do it, but he passed it on to his son, and that was another big success. So you got these black people who are now terrorized by the murders in Chicago. I'm talking about Chicago primarily here. Terrorized by these murders who are lining up around the block and going out and buying these maxi coats and the big hat and the pimp outfit because Superfly was a pimp. And so now you've got the new paradigm for the Negro, and that is the pimp. He's no longer a revolutionary. He's a pimp, and he's got a big Cadillac Eldorado, and he's extremely promiscuous, got all these girls, and that became the new model. And I'm saying it had a devastating effect on black culture, especially in Chicago, which I sort of know fairly well because of the people I know there. And in the article, I go into detail into the life of Gloria Hardy, who's 2 years younger than me, and was involved with the Black Panthers, and then tells me about her husband, how her husband started acting out after he saw these movies. And then, of course, I go into the other story of Carolyn Peoples, who was born in 1977 and ended up being a serial killer. All because, in a sense, of the change of paradigm. And so I'm saying here that this change in paradigm led to change in sexual behavior. This led to the breakup of the black family, or let's put it this way, it accelerated the breakup of the black family. And I'm saying that when you break, the family is like an atom, or that's why they call it the nuclear family, I guess, okay? And if you split the atom, you release all kinds of negative, destructive energy. And that's precisely what happened in Chicago. So in 1970, I believe it's 77. No, it's 2 years after Superfly. So I think we're talking about 75. Anyway, right around that time, you have the highest murder rate in Chicago history. 790 people got murdered in Chicago in 1975, I believe. It's in the article. I don't know the exact date. 80% of those people were black. 80%, that means black people shooting other black people. And I'm saying it's now down to 430 as of last year. But that's a lot of people. And I'm saying if Black Lives Matter, why are we talking about one guy in Ferguson instead of 430 guys in Chicago?
It doesn't fit the narrative, yeah. So they have
It doesn't fit. You're exactly right. It does not fit the narrative because the narrative is white racism. The powers that be now want to resurrect the myth of white racism or the aura of white racism, and that's what happened in Ferguson. Michael Brown was, engaged in robbing a convenience store, swaggering down the street. Darren Wilson sees him. Michael Brown tries to take his gun away, and ends up getting shot, and that gets turned into a national incident because of Soros money and the complicity of the Jewish media.
With Gordon Parks, and he was handed the screenplay for Superfly by Jim Aubrey, who was the MGM honcho.
Yeah.
And in the article, you suggest that, or at least Gordon Parks' widow or ex-wife says that he was CIA all the way.
That's what she said.
Yeah.
But I asked her. I asked her. Yeah, it was his third wife. I said, "Was he a CIA agent?" She said, "No, that's ridiculous." And then she starts saying all these other people were, and he would say he had to be debriefed every time by the CIA. So it's like a semantic. We're talking about a semantic.
Well, we know how that works. I mean, CIA and Hollywood, they're not really separate. It's at that level. The people who control Hollywood are all tied into the people who have interest or control the intelligence agencies, corporate America. It's like separating ExxonMobil from the CIA.
Or Time Life from the CIA.
Yeah, Time Life's a good example.
Harry Lewis would be briefed by the CIA guys. They'd come to Time Life. They didn't have to go there. They would. I mean, that went both ways. Mm-hmm. But he would be briefed. and they would say, well, look, we need a new paradigm.
That
I mean,
well,
that's the type of thing that they would be there to do. That's exactly why Gordon Parks was hired.
it's interesting because that whole scenario, which prior to reading your article, I was familiar with blaxploitation films and laughed at them like everyone else did, but wasn't familiar with the intrigue behind them. But once I read the article, it was very plausible because I'm familiar with Time Life and their role in shaping the culture, and also how they've been tied into the intelligence agencies. There was Gordon Wasson's operation with Life in 1957 with the magic mushroom promoting psychedelic drugs, and that was been exposed as part of the MK Ultra project and putting that story on Life magazine. There's also, you may not be aware of this, but Gloria Steinem has since been exposed as a CIA.
Sure, I was aware of that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's if you read her back, and she admits it now, but she went to Smith College, despite coming from a very poor family. It's a very elite school, and she was a recipient of a Chester Bowles Scholarship, which is a CIA scholarship, which was awarded. She was the first one to receive the scholarship, and the last one to receive the scholarship. But she went on to this is what's relevant is with Ms. Magazine. Similar operation. They're kind of a divide and conquer thing,
Sure.
culture degradation. But
Sure.
but Ms. Magazine published an article called it was an article called "Black Macho and the Myth of the Superman" in 1978, and it was supposed written by Michelle Wallace, who was a 22-year-old black woman, but people think, or at least suspected, that it was ghostwritten by Steinem herself. But her background, and that was done to promote black feminism and degrade the black male, which is a part of I think the overall agenda here was to destroy the black family, male authority. But but she was in league with Cord Meyer. She dated this guy Stanley Pottinger, who was a Nixon and Ford DOJ official who covered up the.
You know what? There's a pattern here too, and she's the female version of it.
Yeah.
But it goes all the way back to the Jacobite Rising of 1745, when they conquered the Highland Scots, and instead of just taking them and exterminating them, they sent their sons, the sons of the lairds, to Cambridge and Oxford.
Yeah, yeah.
Adam Smith was in France with one of these scions, and he died. He up and died, and he had to take the body back to England. This is perdured through things like the Rhodes Scholarship, for example, which is another vetting process where they seem to like orphans. They seem to like fatherless men. Both Adam Smith and David Hume were picked by the Whig oligarchs for scholarships at Cambridge and Oxford, and they were both, neither man knew his father. And so the Whig oligarch then can step in psychologically and become the father figure, and basically the man becomes a tool. Or as Reverend Wright said to Obama, who is another guy with this kind of ambivalent relationship, you become a nigger for the empire. Bill Clinton, another example, fatherless guy who got a Rhodes Scholarship. We have another example in South Bend, Indiana. The mayor of South Bend, Pete Buttigieg, is a Rhodes Scholar. He knows who his father lives right down the street here, but he is a homosexual, which in my book always indicates a disturbed relationship with the father. Mm-hmm. So we have a pattern here, and Gloria Steinem is apparently the female variant on this pattern.
Yeah, that's what I found most compelling about your article was that this fits into that pattern, and recognizing patterns is what we should all do when we're investigating these things, whether it's a crime or event or something. Recognizing these patterns, and it fits that model. But this gets into talking about the degradation of the black community. They were targeted. This promotion of the pimp. So they're promoting criminal, irresponsible behaviors. Sexual irresponsibility. This creates a criminal environment which promotes these conflicts. It scares the heck out of the white middle class. So you have you sort of have a strategy of tension going on here. It's sort of certain, like Nixon's silent majority, that type of politics. But it just goes back to these conflicts with the police, because you've mentioned it in the article, and also in several interviews that I watched about. You have a combination of this, I guess you could call it this ghetto lumpenproletariat, who go out, they're good for nothing. They can create crime. This creates a response by the police. But you also have this militarization of the police that's been occurring since the 70s, but it's really picked up since in the past 15, 20 years.
Right.
describe I guess that dialectic, what's going on there?
Yeah, the government is forcing or pressuring local police departments to take on military style weapons and even military vehicles. We have the situation in South Bend, Indiana. As I said, this man who is now mayor is an agent of the elites. He's going to be promoted. He's like got a charmed life now. So the first thing he does is fire the black police chief, who's a local guy, and bring in some mercenary from Tajikistan. The guy first thing he does is order $450,000 worth of equipment from some company to fire like speakers or microphones to pick up shots on the west side or something like that. And then, I mean, I have to say I'm involved in this a little bit. I denounced this as the Israelicization of the police force. There's a little bit of flack. And then it turns out the guy quits. Okay. Or I think what happened is the mayor threw him under the bus to get the black vote. So he goes to work for the company that paid that he got the $450,000 contract for.
And so and so it goes.
So this is so now there's a bill before city council trying to ban a revolving door bill based on this type of scandalous behavior. But what you're seeing here is basically, as I said, the Israelicization of the police force, where the police are the Israelis. It's not a local police force. The police are trained to be the Israelis, to look upon the local population as the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And this tension is already there with the black and white thing, which then gets exacerbated. So you have the vicious circle where the black people are constantly being told that they have these grievances that allow them to basically treat authority with contempt. Okay. And then you've got the police department getting more and more nervous because the black people or people in general have lost respect for their authority. So it's a bad situation.
And of course,
bad situation.
With the breakup of the family in the black community, I think illegitimacy was like 12-13% in the beginning of the 60s. Now it's closer to 80%.
Yeah.
And that deplorable state, of course, creates a situation in these communities. You know, the pathologies of the ghetto that we've come to, all know and love, creates this environment where, high crime, violence, I think a lot of this was intentional because it plays into the politics.
Sure. It's a way of removing political opposition. So as I said, I was in Iran, and the example in Iran is we're all sitting around the black Muslims took over the conference. So it was their paradigm that was being promoted, which is basically the conventional narrative of white racism. So we have in the middle of the conference, there's a news flash. Here's the video. Just a black girl in South Carolina sitting in her chair. Cop comes in, throws her on the floor, and drags her out of the room. And everyone says, "See, we told you so. This is police brutality, white racism, so on and so forth." Well, I said, no, wait a minute. That's not, I didn't get a chance to say it, but eventually I got to say it on television, Iranian television, which is probably better than just the conference. But anyway, I said, what's going on here? This is this is the situation the polarized situation that is being exploited here. The teacher, apparently, whoever her name is, Shamika, whatever, is talking on her cell phone. And the teacher says, "Time to put your cell phone away, Shamika." And, ain't nobody going to tell me, because the one thing Shamika learned in school was that she was Rosa Parks. The story of Rosa Parks. She's in the back of the bus, and these white people are telling her what to do. And so she's not going to do that. And so at this point, you got to call the police in. Now, why are the police in the school? Well, because the situation got out of control a long time ago. So the policeman comes in and says, "Shamika, it's time to hang up your cell phone." "No, ain't no," and so on. So he grabs her and throws her on the floor and drags her out. That's the situation. Now, if you want to instrumentalize that, it would be easy to do, but that's not the reality of the situation, and that's part of the problem.
And that's, again, what you're going back to, that lumpenproletariat attitude.
This can be exploited. I mean, Marx had nothing but contempt for the lumpenproletariat, because they couldn't be active revolutionaries, but they can be instrumentalized. You can foster their desire to have crime. Mm-hmm. You can do that. You can do all of these things.
And again, let's not discount that there's been a qualitative change in the training and equipping of police, which has changed their demeanor and behavior. It's very troubling. If you want to go on YouTube, there's plenty of instances of 215-pound white cops manhandling and beating up 105-pound women for not signing a traffic ticket and overreacting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to exonerate every single cop of misbehavior. I'm trying to elucidate the dynamic that is being orchestrated here for political purposes.
You want to contextualize it, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
And again, the takeaway from this isn't that there aren't problems, there aren't real grievances that should be addressed, or at least in some way, but at the same time, they're being exploited by outside parties that have other objectives that have nothing to do with the welfare of the community that's being affected. In fact,
George Soros. George
Soros is the perfect embodiment of that incarnation of that type of attitude, that type of person. The oligarch who sits above the fray, pulling the strings and creating the problems and swooping in and buying everything up on the cheap after the fact.
Yeah, yeah.
It's what they did. It's what they did in Russia. It's what they're doing in what they did in Libya and Syria.
That's right. That's the modus operandi these days.
And so it's the game of empire. And so, well, Dr. Jones, I said it. You said I don't have you for 45 minutes today. I don't want to take any more of your time tonight. I want to thank you for coming on and taking on a very difficult topic. But again, I think in that article and in your various interviews, you've covered a dimension to this thing that very rarely ever gets discussed, but has to be discussed because it is not the only consideration, but it is an important dimension to the story that needs to be understood, because it isn't. We're not just talking about Ferguson or Baltimore or Missouri. We're talking about the whole world at this point. This is going on all over the world. So,
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, it's culturewars.com.
Culturewars.com, the December 2015 issue.
And okay, well, listen, I want to wish you a happy, a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year then, and good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.